One of the biggest struggles and issues that founders and CEOs and entrepreneurs face, Kevin, really kind of across the board, is finding that delicate balance between having enough time with your family, the real reason you're doing everything you're doing, and your work. And Kevin, you have developed over the years and all the different incarnations of your career, really figuring out a way to navigate this. So Kevin Rice, I want to welcome you to the Inner Estate.
Thank you so much for having me today.
I'm really looking forward to digging in on this with you because you're in the trenches and you're actually doing this. And what you're sharing with everyone is being a remarkably successful founder, CMO, selling a business, I believe, for 9 figures. So incredible success at work, realizing that it wasn't quite satisfying you in all areas. And now you are helping other people do that as you're doing it for yourself. Can you share with us, Kevin, why does this happen so often and how can people get ahead of it?
Yeah, it's something that I certainly struggled with. And I know a lot of people that I worked with in my career and colleagues struggled with being able to feel like you're succeeding in your career and still showing up for your family at home. The reality is like work-life balance is kind of, but it's
No?
just not it's just not realistic.
Right.
When you have a big career, you have a lot of goals, a lot of ambition, and you're a high performer, it takes more than a 9 to 5 to be successful. That's just the reality. Very few people, I mean, there are some people, but like very few are able to achieve what they want to achieve in a 9 to 5 workday. So what I've talked to a bunch of different executives about is the alternative, which is not necessarily an exact balance when it comes to hours, but just being more present and intentional with your family life. So giving more forethought into how you're going to spend your time with your kids, how you're going to use that time to instill values, how you're going to teach them, how you're going to like help give them boundaries and guardrails as they're exploring who they actually are. So yeah, you're never going to have enough time for everything. There's like the 4 burners theories, and you don't have ample time for everything. So it really comes down to, if you're going to be successful in your career, it's going to take a lot of your mental bandwidth, a lot of your energy, and a lot of your time. So in the time you do have with your family, it's really important to be intentional with that time to make sure it's meaningful and valuable and that you're present. So you're not on your phone, you're not checking email, Slack messages, doom scrolling. You need to set the phone down and you need to set other distractions down. And sometimes that might mean letting the dishes go for a night so that your kids get what they need from you. And that's connection.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned the dishes this early in the conversation, because one of the areas that I think people overlook is getting leverage and support in the personal life and at home. I think it's so easy for founders and CEOs. We always think about leverage at work, right? You're like,
Yeah.
right, if I got another virtual assistant, they could handle this. I would have more time. But then we don't necessarily think about it for at home. How important is having leverage in the management of your household to be able to prioritize that family time?
Yeah, it's a very timely question and topic. The podcast I just released this week was with Jennifer Kotula. She's the CMO of Microsoft Advertising. And that was the spirit of the entire episode. Is she really shared, and I believe this too, is you need to find what your irreplaceable contribution is. What can only you uniquely bring to the table. And this applies at work and at home. And when it comes to home, it's connection. Right. That's the one
Right.
thing that you provide as a parent that nobody else can provide. Like, yes, you can hire other people to come clean your house, to do your landscaping, to do your taxes. And you probably should if you can look through the list of the ways you're spending your time, and they could be automated because there's a lot of great technology to automate even household duties and tasks today, or they can be outsourced so that you can free up more time to really build connection with your kids.
I think it's really a critical opportunity. And it's one of those where it even has a ripple effect. I know there's been studies done in my chosen industry of real estate of the impact of when realtors are doing well, how many other people do well, and when realtors are not doing well, how things that are cut off. But if you actually consider, not only are you freeing up that time so you can have experiences or even just time spent with connection with your family, you're also allowing someone else to thrive in their chosen career when you hire them on and bring them on. And actually, you talk about, taking skills from work and bringing them home. I find that if you, as your skills as a founder or CEO, if you actually bring those skills to the table in your relationship with your household leverage, then they're going to feel valued. They're going to feel like it's more significant than just you showed up clean and got the money and hit the road. So it can definitely free up critical time either for family or for yourself.
Sure. Really important not to neglect your personal interests and hobbies, because that's a big part of who you are. And again, that's something that a lot of executives, entrepreneurs, founders, they do is they give everything to their career and they have so little for themselves. And then 20 years later, they're trying to find themselves again at 60 years old. And they don't know how to just have fun anymore.
Well, Kevin, you bring up a great point in that. And I've had so many guests, excellent guests, who actually went through a crisis time. So after massive success and being this founder and, selling their company or having their company kind of taken over, because what happened is they pushed and pushed and pushed, burned out, and ended up being graciously removed from their position by the new board or the new ownership. And then they've rebuilt themselves, and that's the story, is that redemption arc. But it is something that if you don't get off of that treadmill, not only can you have negative impact at home, you could also have negative impact in your work.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the place I'm at in my life, is that like redemption arc, you might say. Is that, I spent 13 years building a company, started in my garage with my best friend from college, and we built it from the two of us to about 250 employees. And in the last 3 or 4 years of that, before the company was acquired, that was my burnout phase. But for me, it showed up differently because I could still work 14 hours a day. I could travel and I wouldn't like burn out from productivity. But what I did do was I disconnected from myself. And I went into what I call robot mode, because at the same time, my company was doubling in size year over year. I went through a divorce. My ex is an alcoholic. And, I became a single father, solo parenting 2 kids. One of them was about 3.5. My youngest at the time was 4 weeks old. And so on top of growing a company, I was single parenting. COVID happened. So that was fun, just to throw a global pandemic into the mix, because who doesn't need more stress? And the only way I could cope with it, like my coping mechanism, was robot mode, completely shut down from my emotions and then be hyper productive. And, that was kind of my survival technique. And it got me through a really tough period. But the problem is when you disconnect from yourself and you disconnect from your emotions, you disconnect from the relationships that matter to you most. So my kids. And I didn't know how to show up as a parent. I would give 100% of my energy to my career, and that was going well. And then I'd show up at home and I'd go into default mode. I'd be default dad. And I just wasn't, I was physically there, but I wasn't emotionally or mentally present. Like I could read bedtime stories and be rehearsing a sales presentation or going through my leadership agenda. And I thought that was like, I'm great at multitasking. The reality is I was just failing at being present as a father. And so, I had to go through my kind of rebuilding phase, and I did everything I could. I worked with a parenting coach. I went to parenting seminars. I read books, podcasts. I got into journaling and meditation, did all the things, and eventually kind of was able to like refine who I am without the context of success in my career, because I was very much using career as a way to get external validation. So, I struggled with self-esteem as a kid, and that kind of carried through. And then I found this mechanism to give me external validation to feel better about myself, and that was my career. So you'd have sales wins, the company would grow. You'd get all this validation, and that would help me feel better about myself. Problem is when I didn't have that, you don't get that from your kids. They're not like, Dad, you did a great job making dinner tonight. Like, good job. You're going to get good remarks on your performance review. And so all of a sudden I had to find out like, okay, how can I build my own self-esteem without getting it from my career?
So this was all happening at the same time. And the sale of your corporate baby that you created, I love that story as well. And it's a great story. Check that out, the rise and how you started in the garage and built that up. So the sale of that happened while you were in this mode of connecting with yourself and realizing it sounds like you had reached a point of being a quote unquote good parent because you were going through the motions of doing everything required for your children to stay alive and be fed and move,
Yes.
but the emotional connection was not present, right? Um,
Yeah.
and then
Well, what
this great sale of your company was occurring somewhere in the middle of that time frame.
Yeah, well, so when the company sold, because I was so disconnected from myself and I was in robot mode, I didn't really get that feeling of like, oh, I just climbed a mountain. I'm at the peak, like what you would expect from working for 13 years and then having this fantastic exit at the end. I thought I was going to feel just
Right.
relief and success and joy and accomplishment. And I kind of didn't. I just kind of felt like another Tuesday. Financially, my life would change forever, but emotionally, I was still in the same place. And I just realized I had a new peak to climb. Like, I had kind of summited the first peak of
Right.
like career success. And then I realized like there's this whole other inner peak that I needed to dive into and climb. And so I did. Like I started working on myself and working on my family life with the same intentionality that I did my career. So today, if I go into an evening, I know what I'm going to do with my kids and there's a purpose behind it. Or if I go into the weekend, I've got a plan for the weekend and there's, underlying reasons for what we're doing because I'm either trying to create connection, I'm trying to instill values, I'm trying to teach my kids something. It might be about resilience or grit or teamwork. We have different activities that we do that I believe will help them, kind of shape their own values as they grow up and go off into the world.
So a lot of times when I hear something like that, which is great, I also wonder there's probably a listener that is thinking that he's overscheduling things. You don't mean that you go into the weekend and every minute is scheduled and it's going to be following a regiment. Could
Oh,
you just go a
yeah.
little bit more into that aspect of it? Because I don't want anyone thinking that you're like overscheduling or over pressurizing.
Sure. Yeah, no, the intent is to just not go into time spent with family in kind of a default mode. It's more of to have a
Hmm.
plan. And that plan might be this is an unstructured free time block where the kids are going to decide what we're going to do. That might be free building Legos or it might be going on a
Right.
bike ride. But the point of it is like you wouldn't go into a board meeting or a one-on-one without a plan of what you're going to talk to your team about or what you're going to talk to your board
Right.
about. So for me, I used to just go into my personal life without a plan. And things started to shift when I was more intentional about that because the time felt more meaningful. It felt more accretive to
Mhm.
what I was trying to create in terms of like culture in my family.
And, it's interesting because as you said, you wouldn't go into a board meeting without an objective in mind or a desired outcome or at least a connection being made in terms of is everyone on the same page? Also, using that work analogy, you wouldn't go into a company retreat day or weekend without having the same thing. So you're just taking that. So it doesn't mean that it's an agenda and overly structured. It just means that you have intentionality in terms of the desired way that you'd like for your kids to feel when they're with you in that
Yeah,
given time frame.
absolutely. I think everybody asks about work life balance. And I think the answer that I've personally found and I hear from other executives is it's more about intentionality and presence in the time you do have
Hmm.
with your kids.
You mentioned about scrolling on the phone, and that's something that can be such an issue. We all know there's people, sitting down for dinner and all through dinner, checking their phone or scrolling or hold on a minute so do you have any recommendations in terms of the intrusion of the phone and phone management when you're with family?
Yeah, it's unique, right? I didn't grow up seeing my parents distracted on phones, but today it's pervasive, right? You're constantly
Right.
inundated with messages and you feel like you have to respond to it right away. And the reality is probably a lot of it can sit for the evening. So some of the things I do is like I put my phone in a specific place and I kind of make a production of it or a show of it. Like when I'm uh starting my evening with my kids, like the phone goes in a certain place and they see me put it there. So they know, like, oh, okay, dad's setting that aside. He's present. He's here. I can engage with him. I also use tools like Opal on my phone, which
Hmm.
gives me specific time blocks where I can be accessing different apps based on time of the day and reason for using them. But yeah, I think it just comes back to like, it's really hard to be present when you have something in your pocket that's trained you to pick it up every 30 seconds.
That's right. That is right. Yeah, it's interesting the impact that's having. Uh, and you're right. We didn't. In fact, when I was younger, my parents would actually be upset if the landline phone rang during dinner. They'd be like,
Hmm.
"Who's calling us during the dinner hour?" Like it was very. And look how things have changed so much in just really barely one generation,
Yeah.
maybe two generations, if we want to stretch it a little bit. Well, you've gone through several incarnations with work. Right now, you're very passionately hosting a podcast, CEOs and ABCs. Can you tell us a little bit more about the podcast, why you're so excited about that, and what you're doing with it?
Yeah, I think it just kind of came out of my personal struggles and my personal journey to figure out how to translate everything I've learned in my career, because that's where I spent all my time, right? I've read books, went to conferences, had executive coaches. I invested
Right.
so much in developing my leadership skills and I got fairly proficient at it. But then I'd come home and I'd have no idea what to do with my kids, how to deal with a tantrum, how to deal with sibling rivalry, all these things. Like that's a whole curriculum in of itself that I just was ignorant to. And so the podcast kind of came out of my own experience and talking with other executives who've had similar experiences that like struggle with being what they feel like is a good parent. One of the reasons I started the podcast was, I did sell my company. So I took some time off to focus on myself and rebuild myself. And I didn't want my kids to grow up not seeing me be passionate and productive and building something that, I am passionate about. So like after taking a few years
Right.
off, my kids didn't really remember because they were younger how hard I did work. And so I was like, all right, I need to get back into some sort of work activity so that my kids see me working hard, because that's where I got my work ethic from, was watching my father. And I didn't know what it was going to be. I didn't want to start a new company. I wasn't ready for that. Like maybe sometime in the future. I didn't want to get a traditional job because I haven't interviewed for a job since I was 16. I don't even know what that would look like.
Yeah.
And then I was at a conference, and it's a funny story. I was sitting down with somebody who eventually was a guest on my show. And we did a tarot reading because, like, at conferences, they have like little fun activities. We did a tarot reading.
Right.
And he asked the question of, how do I be successful in my career without sacrificing my relationship with my kids? And at the same time, I was thinking about like, okay, what's my next act? Like, what's my act two in my career? And things just started clicking. And I came up with the idea for the podcast. And I just went for it. I have no idea how to build a podcast because my business was technology consulting. So media is a very different world than what I used to operate in. But I'm passionate about it. And I've had some amazing executives telling stories of, growing up without parents or being a single parent or dealing with the loss of a child. And they've been able to really humanize what life looks like outside of your LinkedIn resume. And these are, people who are CEO, CMO of Fortune 5, Fortune 100 companies. And so it's been
Hmm.
amazing to see the vulnerability and the authenticity, and just to kind of get a peek behind the closed doors of what life looks like for somebody who's insanely successful in their career and but struggles with all the same things that we struggle with at home.
And it's a keen insight. From the outside, most of your guests appear to others as if they have it all together and life is easy and everything is perfect. And wow, that CEO, that CMO of that Fortune 100 company, their life is easy and wonderful. I think, is a very common perception.
Yeah.
And so for them to be able to be on your podcast and then show that real human side and be vulnerable, it's really insightful, whether you're a CEO or not. You may be a high performing salesperson or a manager, but you can learn from and see that if they are facing something similar and they have challenges themselves, because they make it look easy. The part they show the outside world, it's part of it, is that it appears that it's easy. So I feel like you're opening a doorway with your podcast where anyone could listen to that and realize, A, that they're not alone. They're not the only person that faces the variety of struggles that you shared, and that even people at the top are still dealing with the day-to-day life, self-disappointment, self-perception, and relationships.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. It's really like people are able to relate to others' stories and realize they're not alone. That's a big part of it. The second part is getting some tips and tricks along the way, right? Learning from
Right,
successes, learning from failure. People will share their kind of daily routines or how they get more time back in their day so they can have more time for connection with their kids. Like one of the things we'll talk about often is habit stacking. Like, how do you take different
hmm
aspects of your life and stack them together so you're doing them at the same time so you can free up more time for other things? Simple,
right,
obvious example is like if you want to exercise and take care of your body and your health, well, you could either do that with friends so that you are kind of killing two birds with one stone. I don't like that analogy, but I can't think
right,
of anything else.
right,
Or maybe you're doing your exercise with your kids, or something I do often is I get on a walking treadmill and I do my phone calls or I do working sessions because I've got a little tray on top of my Peloton that I can type on while I'm walking. So put it on an incline, put on a weight vest and walk at a very slow pace. And I could do that for hours while I'm typing, get all the exercise in that I need for my body to feel good. And at the same time, I'm accomplishing work stuff. So now all of a sudden, I'm not, going to the gym or going out with friends on Friday
right.
night because I've kind of stacked those things together and I've freed up more time with my kids.
You know, you've talked a lot about children, and obviously that is any of us who have chosen to become parents, that is the most critical job that we have. How does this impact other relationships, either familial or significant other types of relationships? I'm assuming that what you're discussing would also include any kind of relationship that's a key relationship in your life.
Sure. Yeah. So I recently wrote a manuscript. I'm hoping to get it published, going out to publishers right now. And the title of it's The Executive's Guide to Parenting. Everything in there is really a relationship guide. In the book, it's about the
hmm
relationship with your children, but a lot of it applies. So, what happened for me was when I started trying to figure out how to be a better parent, a lot of the content that I was consuming, videos, books, courses, didn't feel like it really resonated with me as a career professional, high performing executive. Everything felt like it was kind of written for like a stay at home parent. So I couldn't resonate with it. So I started spending a lot of time figuring out, okay, what do I actually know a lot about? And that was like leadership and business. And so I figured, okay, if I can take what I do know something about, apply it to something that I'm kind of struggling to learn, maybe that will help me. And so I started looking at all of these like business frameworks, like flywheels and maturity models and Eisenhower matrices and like how can I use those that I did every day in my career and how can I apply them with maybe some, different like different adjustments because these are my kids. I'm not trying to treat them like employees, but how can I
So
apply them? And
you
that
added nuance. You added nuance to
correct.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. And so, I wrote a book because like that's how I figured out how to be a better parent. And by no means am I like a parenting expert. This was just like how I translated my career learnings into being a better parent. The reason I bring it up is one of the tools in there was a flywheel that I talked about. In business, flywheels are typically used to generate momentum around like revenue and profits, used in marketing or operations. So I created a flywheel for the currency of the home, which is connection. And so the flywheel acronym is SPARC, and the steps of it is safety, presence, attunement, rituals, and celebration. And that's kind of how I try to create momentum for connection with my kids. Now, that flywheel is really a tool for human connection. I chose to use it for my kids, but like, of course, that could work in your relationships with your significant others or friends
Or parents or siblings.
or
Yeah, yeah,
parents or,
it's a
right
universal.
back. Yeah. Or right back to work and probably helps you build connection with your team and your employees.
Right. Yeah, and I guess that's what I was wanting to stress is that although you're starting with the most important goal of the children, that it's something that would have a ripple effect and impact you and how you show up in relationships.
Absolutely.
It's very exciting to me because we have a similar feeling. Many of the books that you describe, and as soon as you said it, it's like you are right. The taking the context that executives and professionals use at work, they will be able to click, connect, and resonate, and it will make sense to them in a more accessible way. And I think they'll be able to implement it at home much more so than many of the books out there that would be more for a stay-at-home type of parent.
Yeah, and
Brilliant.
that's not to say being a stay-at-home parent doesn't have its own challenges. It's just a different mindset,
Yeah,
perspective, audience. And the
right.
books I was reading, like I love them. Like I love Dr. Becky, Good Inside's amazing, but it just wasn't quite connecting with me as
That's right.
somebody who's like a very high performing professional.
Yeah. And why not? I mean, I mean that. I think that's brilliant. It's a brilliant way to create that access point for people that are struggling with it and you'll be speaking their language. So you'll be speaking the language of an executive, a high performing achiever in their career that is winning at work and not feeling like they're winning at home,
Yep.
for them to be able to relate to it and then implement, because
Yeah.
it's going to be their language.
Yeah. And, for me, the reason I knew that I needed to dive into this curriculum of being a better parent and figure out how to translate my like leadership skills and frameworks into parenting was because I was seeing behaviors that in my children that were a direct result from how I was parenting. So I was seeing, defiance at an early age. I was seeing very low frustration tolerance. I was seeing a lot of sibling rivalry. These were things that were making my house fairly chaotic. And, I've got 3 boys, so it's always going to be chaotic. But there was just behaviors that just I wasn't seeing with other kids. And I was really worried about it. And ultimately, like I'm the parent, I'm accountable, right? There's some
Right.
nature involved, but there's a lot of nurture involved. And so I had to take like
Right.
radical accountability and say, if my kids are behaving in certain ways, well, they're a mirror of me. They're reflecting my own behavior. So I had to take a hard look in the mirror and say, okay, if my kids are complaining so much, like, am I complaining too much? Like, where is this coming from? And, because I wasn't as connected with my middle child, I became a single father when he was like 4 weeks old and I was
Mhm.
working very long hours. So he didn't have that primary parental attachment that a lot of kids get. Obviously I had to bottle feed. I sleep trained him. In retrospect, I wish I would have done different things, but those led to like an underdeveloped nervous system. And I've had him tested with, chiropractors and, you can see that his nervous system is underdeveloped. So when he gets frustrated, he goes from 0 to 10 very quickly and he has a challenge regulating his abilities. So like, we've been through occupational therapy, we've done somatic exercises, everything I can, but I do have to look back and be like, they're a mirror of me. So, like, what do I need to change in myself so that I can help them develop and mature into like more well-adjusted kids? And thankfully, after years of a lot of work, I've seen things shift tremendously in my household. And they're still fighting, there's still arguments, there's still temper tantrums, but the culture is different. The mood in the room feels different.
And hopefully, I'm assuming communication in all directions is different. Not perfect. I didn't say perfect, but they probably communicate and are able to relate with each other in a different manner.
Yeah, I mean, they're brothers. They still fight. They
Yeah.
still argue with each other. But just this past week, I was working with my oldest son on boundaries.
Mhm.
Came to me, and thankfully, he feels secure enough to talk to me about when he's having challenges, even if it makes him feel a little insecure. So, like, his
Mhm.
younger brother is teasing him. He's the older brother. He feels insecure because he's the older brother. He shouldn't get teased by his younger brother, but that's what's happening. And my oldest son does show a lot of restraint. He doesn't use his physical size to push back. So he says, like, Dad, if I can't punch him or push him, then what do I do when I'm getting teased? And so we had a long conversation about boundaries. And we said, like, look, you can set a boundary with your brother that if he's teasing you, you don't have to tolerate it. You can walk away and not play with him. And then he's not getting what he wants because he wants a reaction. He's getting attention in a
Right.
negative way. So he's getting negative attention. He's getting what he wants if you engage. So we had a lot of conversations about how to set a boundary, how to maintain it. And then even, talk to like his homeschool teacher about supporting him in that boundary because he knows I'm going to support him. So other people in his life now understand what he's trying to set as a boundary. So these are conversations that I didn't know the word boundary when I was 10 years old. But by being
Right.
a more conscious parent, I can help educate him from a young age. And then hopefully he grows up, not having to wait till he's 40 years old to learn about boundaries.
Right. That's really remarkable. So going back to what you are doing professionally now, so you have the podcast, you've written a book and you're working on getting that published. You're also, though, still doing investing, usually I believe in smaller either startups or businesses. If someone asks you conversationally, what do you do? What do you consider to be your primary career right now?
Yeah, so I'm investing and advising in those startups. I've
Mhm.
made 5 investments in startups. They're kind of seed stage investments. So a sizable
Mhm.
amount, but earlier stage companies. Very specifically looking at companies that are creating innovation in the way that I define innovation. So not just something cool or exciting or like interesting, but very specifically using AI to change the way that a business operates or the way that a business connects with their customer. And so I'll give you an example. One of the companies I invested in is called In-Store AI. And what they've done is they've created recording devices that go at cash registers for convenience stores and retailers and restaurants. And it records 100% of the conversations between a guest and a cashier. Now, that's all goes up into an LLM model and it comes back as reporting and dashboards and insights and guidance for these retailers on how to improve their customer experience. And I got really excited about this because I was like, man, every part of a business is digitalized today and has analytics. This is kind of the last black box of the guest experience
Right.
that nobody knows what's actually happening, right? Like you could send in secret shopper, but that gives you like a little tiny glimpse of what's happening, just a snippet. This is always on 24/7, capturing every conversation so that you can feed that back into your corporate strategy to develop better operations, better guest experience, better marketing, and just overall be more effective. So super excited about this because when I heard it, I had never thought, like, it just didn't cross my mind. And I was like, that's amazing. That's brilliant. Like, I want to be a part of this.
That's awesome. So when you look at your breakdown of your working with the startups and doing that investing and that work and your podcast, would you say that that is now allowing you to have success at work and also feel like you are being successful at home? Do you feel like you have found?
I don't think it's the time or the mix, right? Because it's all kind of ebbs and flows. Like when I was writing my book, that was long hours. When I was first
Mhm,
figuring out how to do a podcast, there's a lot of operations that I didn't know how to
mhm.
do. Now advising, I kind of like right size each amount of advising time that I do based on the investment. But again, I don't think it really comes back to time. I think it comes back to presence and intentionality. I have objectives, I have goals, I have standards for myself, and all of those translate into how I use my time. And the time that I do have for my kids is precious and it doesn't get scheduled over by anything. It's protected. And in that time, I have plans. Like I have forethought and intentionality into how I'm going to spend that time with my kids. Because when I didn't have that intentionality, it just kind of default through the evening. And I'd be like, what did we actually do together? We didn't do anything. We didn't
Right,
build connection. Like,
right.
you know, if I was exhausted and I was running on fumes, like I'd put on a movie or something. That's like the least connected I feel with my kids is we're just staring at a screen watching a show. So like now we have
Right.
certain amount of like TV time that we watch together and it's structured and it's scheduled and like that's it. Cause that doesn't feel like the best use of my time with my kids.
Well, what you were describing too, when you have that evening and you're exhausted and you're like, you put a movie on and it just is, then the time goes by. That is where I think a lot of people start feeling that emptiness and they feel as if they're wasting time.
And
And then they'll get
guilt.
mad at themselves of like, oh, I wasted the time. Yeah, and
It's
you
a
don't
cycle,
feel
right?
rested. Yeah,
Yeah.
you just feel the same or worse level of exhaustion and it doesn't restore your mental capacity
Yeah.
either. So
Yeah.
so it does sound like, I'll ask the question in a different way. With your current creative outlets, your writing, the podcast, and your investing, and what you're doing at home, are you feeling more satisfied with your own self and your life?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's always
Good.
areas to improve. Like personally, I
Right.
have things I'm working on right now. But
Uh-huh.
yeah, I think just being more intentional, more present feels more fulfilling and it feels more like I'm building towards something, both professionally and in my home parenting.
I'm sure there's people listening to us right now, and I could imagine someone listening and saying, well, that's easy for him, company, and he sold it for a lot of money, so he can just, it's easy for him, he can do this. What would you say to someone who is still building to success, still building in their financial world, and, they're not quite where you are in that regard? Can they start incorporating these things now? Do they have to wait until they hit a peak and then they can start working on this? Or is this something that anyone, regardless of where you are today, you could start to work on this now?
Yeah. So you can learn from your own heartache and reach your own bottom, or you can learn from somebody else's, right? That's wisdom, right? Like learning from somebody else's mistakes. I look back and I wouldn't have changed anything about how hard I worked in my career. Before I sold my company, I had no savings. I had no, retirement. I had very little in the bank, and I had to work really hard so that I could build a future for my family. But there was time during that period where I was working 14-hour days. I was still with my kids a couple hours throughout the day, and I could have been more intentional. That's the one thing I would have changed, is like in the time that I was with my kids, had I known what I know now, like I wouldn't have been thinking about sales meetings during bedtime stories, right? Like I wouldn't have walked by my kids without acknowledging them like I used to do. And I would have just, in the time I did have with my kids, I would have been much more intentional and much more present. And I think anybody can do that. And that's kind of what we talked about, is like the tips and tricks to be able to do that, right? So like, one of the things I do is like when I get home for the day, I have a secret handshake that I do with both my kids, right? That is my re-entry ritual that allows me to take off my career hat and put on my parenting hat.
Mm-hmm. And it's great for them because they also now, they know Dad's here.
They feel significant. They feel acknowledged.
Yes.
They feel like they're important. And I want them to feel that way. So there's just like little tips and tricks that I didn't make up. I learned these from other people, but that allow you to, build more connection in the time that you do have. Because if you're ambitious and you want to build something in your career, I celebrate that, because I think it's important to show your kids how to chase their own passions. Their passion might not be building a business. It might be music or science, but they're going to learn from you, and they're going to see if your success comes from hard work, which often it does. They're going to apply that to what they're passionate about. So, I think people would be doing their kids a disservice if they didn't work really hard to build something that's meaningful.
Kevin, I want to thank you so much for sharing all of this with us. I'm truly am excited about the book. I would ask you, please keep me posted on when it is coming out, because I know that it will be picked up and it will be coming out, because I would like to get that and read it, and possibly even invite you back as a guest again to go through even more from the book. Anyone who wants to check out your podcast, once again, it's CEOs and ABCs. And I believe they can find that anywhere they consume podcasts. Correct?
That's correct. Yeah. So YouTube, Apple, Spotify. I write a weekly newsletter that you can sign up for. And then best way to get in touch with me is just on LinkedIn, where I'm pretty active.
Excellent. All right. Well, that sounds great. I want to thank you for being our guest. And it is just the brilliance of speaking in the language of a high-performing CEO or executive or manager, someone in leadership, and using that language so that they can feel more confident in what they're doing at home is brilliant. And I think it's a book the world needs. So I'm really looking forward to that. And if you're listening to this episode of The Inner Estate, I hope that you'll join us again for the next episode. Thank you so much.